Okay, so hi there everyone. Thanks very much for taking the time to watch this video. So my name's Matt Fawcett. I'm the program manager for the energy systems team here at the Carbon Co-op. Carbon Co-op is a Greater Manchester-based community benefit society that works on a range of issues around the energy transition. So today I'm here to talk about what the main challenges are for the UK energy system, how the energy system is changing, how it will change further in the future, and what new roles those changes will create, and what skills and training might be available for people who are considering a future career in the energy system. So this is the bit where I normally throw it open to the floor and ask people to shout out what they think the biggest challenges are. So maybe I'll just give you a couple of seconds to have a little think, and we'll see whether your top three biggest challenges match the ones on the next slide. Okay, so traditionally when we talk about the energy system challenges, it's framed as the energy trilemma, which basically is just a three-way dilemma. And the first of those is decarbonisation. So enshrined in UK law is that the UK will be net zero in its carbon by 2050, but it's actually much more challenging for the UK electricity grid, because the electricity grid is sort of the enabler really that allows all other sectors of the economy to decarbonise. So the UK is actually committed to a total decarbonisation of the UK electricity grid by 2035. So that's quite a challenging deadline given the scale of the changes that need to be made. So the second one is affordability. Obviously, that's a major issue for all of us at the moment. I hope some of you are on long-term fixed tariffs, but for those of us that aren't, we've seen a sort of doubling in the last year of our electricity bills, and we know that come October, when the price cap is reviewed again, the prices will again increase. So it's becoming quite challenging, and it's the sort of central problem really that's pushing the cost of living crisis, not just in the UK but across the world really. So the final one is energy security. So when energy companies talk about this, they often say, we need to ensure that we keep the lights on, and that's essentially it's a simple way of saying that in order for our own well-being and for our prosperity, we need to be able to ensure reliable, consistent supplies of electricity across the UK. And we at Carbon Co-op might add a fourth one to that really, which is the idea of equity. So we already know that the people who are more likely to be vulnerable to fuel poverty, so people who are on lower incomes, for example, tend to pay more for their electricity under the current system. So this is a really major change that we're looking at here in terms of the decarbonisation agenda. So it's going to touch all of it. It's going to touch every household. So how do we ensure that the benefits of decarbonisation are available to everyone equally, and ensure that we don't leave anyone behind? So in terms of decarbonisation, we will look at how the system works currently and what's changing within that system in order to allow decarbonisation. So this is what we would view as the traditional power system. So it's probably what lots of us studied in our geography classes at school. So you'll see we've got large-scale generation up here, which is largely coal, gas, nuclear, feeding into the UK national grid, the transmission network, which then filters down to the distribution network, so at a lower voltage. So this will be then distributed locally by, in our case, Electricity North West, who are the district network operator for the Northwest, through local substations right down to individual households and businesses. And that's very much a system where all of the control takes place at the top. So there is monitoring going on to look at what energy demand is. When there is a need for further energy on the network, the power is simply turned up at those power stations. So, more coal, more gas is put in. The nuclear rods are dipped deeper into the system. So it's one where generation is defined by demand and responds to demand. So, and this is the energy system which we're really starting to enter now, and which we're going to see more and more of in the future. So you'll see that all of the original elements are still there, but they've been augmented by a whole load of new complicating factors. So at the top here, you've got the sort of large wind farms, be that onshore or offshore. You've got your big field scale solar power plants. And you've also got grid level storage. So something that we'll be talking about more is that unlike fossil fuel generation, which can be sort of turned up or down quite easily, as all of us who live in Greater Manchester know, it's not always sunny, and the wind is not always blowing. So we're looking at an intermittent power generation source. So it's important to look at how we can store some of that generation when it's produced. For example, if it's windy at night time when there isn't very high demand, can we store that energy so that when you come to put your kettle on in the morning, that there is energy available? So, but these same elements appear all along the chain now. So you're not just looking at sort of smaller wind farms or storage at a distribution level. You're also looking at people who've got solar panels on their roofs, people who've got a battery in their homes. So the whole system is much more complicated, and it's no longer hierarchical in that you now have energy flowing both ways, both from the individual home or business back into the grid, from the distribution network up to the transmission network. I mean, so this is quite a major change, and one that requires a lot more information in order to be able to manage this level of complexity. So most people will probably by now have had a smart meter fitted in their home, and this is all part of that system of getting more information. So rather than a meter reader coming around your house every couple of months, you're now reporting half-hourly how much gas and electricity you're using back to the grid. So and those sorts of metering systems and data gathering systems are being put in at all levels of the energy network. So it's an ongoing process, and one that we're really only at the early stages of in terms of the distribution and transmission network. So to recap, currently generation is based largely on demand and is turned up or down to meet that demand. But in the future, we're going to have to look at being more flexible in our demand based on generation. So this might be, so if it's a particularly, so can you, for example, charge electric vehicles when there is excess energy on the grid, and you might therefore get energy for a cheaper cost or even free. At the moment, there is not enough data really to be able to fully exploit the potential of flexibility, but digitization is making more and more of that possible all the time. So And we're also aware of lots of things that we know need to happen, which are currently not really economically viable. So we're going to look at there will be more incentives from national government to assist in those areas. So an example of that might be the replacement of gas boilers with electrified heating. So heat pumps and storage heaters and that sort of thing. So the government recently announced the boiler upgrade scheme, which is £5,000 available to UK households who replace their gas boiler with a heat pump in order to offset some of those higher installation costs. So at the moment, as a householder, it's not easy to participate really within the energy market other than through switching your supply, which is not currently a great idea. But in the future, we'll be looking. There'll be more options to do that really. So we already have different flexible tariffs, things like the Octopus Agile tariff, for example, where the energy market is where you're more exposed to the energy market essentially. So that means that in times of really high demand, you'll be paying more for your energy, but it does mean that there are times when you'll be paying a lot less. And we've also seen times when not only are you getting your energy for free, but you're actually being paid to use energy at times when there is too much power on the grid, because too much power can be have almost as many negative consequences as not enough. We're in the middle of an energy crisis. It's important to outline the sort of structures which are at play here in terms of energy affordability and the systems that have been put in place to try and keep energy affordable. So we have a privatized electricity market now, unlike some other European countries. We went through a process of privatizing our previously nationalized energy system, but it's a tricky conflict really, because while it's a free market operation, it's a very highly regulated market. So there have been lots of attempts by government to increase competition and reduce monopolies within the system. You may have heard of the term the Big Six energy companies. So there was and this sort of the various concerns about the potential for sort of price setting and those kind of things. So I think so there was a real attempt to try and break up that market to allow for easy switching, to make it easier for smaller companies to participate within that market. So and that was quite successful, and it resulted in much lower energy bills for people who switched regularly through things like YouSwitch, or compare the market and all these kind of things. But what it did mean was that non-switchers tended to see successively higher and higher bills. So that was tricky. That was often people who are, maybe you're a tenant and the supply is in your landlord's name. Maybe you're on a prepayment meter and switching isn't easy. Maybe you've got energy debt with your existing energy company, so you're not able to switch. Or maybe you're just someone less comfortable with the internet and with switching and all that kind of stuff. So those people tended to be paying more, and those are people generally who are generally more vulnerable. So older people on lower incomes. So the government brought in an energy cap to try and prevent excessive charging to those customers. However, there wasn't, obviously, because that's a fixed cap. What that meant was that when wholesale prices went crazy over the last 18 months and increased very significantly, it meant that companies were not able to make a significant margin between the amount that they were paying for electricity from the wholesale market and the amount they're able to sell it for. And that's resulted in dozens of UK smaller and even some of the larger energy supply companies going out of business. So as a result of that, not only have the tariffs that we pay in terms of per unit energy, obviously they've increased, but we've also seen an increase in standing charges. So that's the fee that you pay every day for having a connection to the gas grid or the electricity grid. And those have been increased across the board because essentially someone needs to pay for those market failures, and that's why all of our standing charge bills have gone up. So it's worth saying as well that even before the current energy crisis, we did have a significant problem with fuel poverty in the UK. So 2.5 million UK households classed as living in fuel poverty. And that's obviously increasing. It will increase dramatically in April and will increase again dramatically when the price cap is again adjusted in October. So, so we're in a pretty grim place really in terms of current UK energy. But the sort of glimmer of hope really is that it does make energy reduction schemes more viable. It makes local renewable generation more viable. So things like people putting solar panels on the roofs of homes and businesses, people carrying out measures of insulation and all of this kind of stuff. And that really is the only way in the long term that we're going to keep bills down is by reducing demand. So in terms of energy security, we're also in a pretty difficult position. So we've suffered really from a bit of a lack of a clear policy direction on energy. This is starting to change, and we're likely to see greater state intervention to secure UK energy supplies. So we've been over the last sort of 20 years, there's been we've got rid of a lot of our storage, particularly gas storage, which has left us in a bit of a vulnerable position in terms of the very short-term spikes in the wholesale gas market. So some other countries that have got greater storage capacity have been able to sort of have enough locally stored that they can not buy it at its peak, basically, but wait, a couple of days or a day until the market adjusts itself slightly. So we are going to see significant investment in terms of reinforcement of the energy grid. So because we're not just talking about trying to replace conventional fossil fuels with greener sources of energy for our current energy, for our current electricity need. But we're also looking at the electrification of transport. So that's replacing the petrol and diesel in cars and buses and trains with electric batteries instead. So that's a huge new load on the grid. Similarly with heat for buildings, increasingly we're moving away from gas as being the primary provider of that onto new technology such as heat pumps. So that again is a huge additional demand. So that's going to need to be met, which means there are lots of new market opportunities for flexibility providers or people who can provide what we call demand response. So when there is lots of power on the grid, using more power, either domestically or in the workplace. When there is less power, being able to scale things down and reduce power usage. So that's really the future that we're looking at. And in terms of equity, I think this is something which is very important to us in terms of traditionally the energy transition work has been carried out through tariffs, through green like rather than through taxation, through a levy on our electricity bills, which means that everyone's paying similar amounts for the energy transition, which might seem just, but the issue is that we are that because people on lower incomes tend to pay more for their electricity, it means that they're paying more per unit than higher users and the people who are in a more sort of fortunate position. So if you think of something like the feed-in tariff that we had, it was a very successful scheme to encourage people to install microgeneration, which is primarily solar on roofs. So this was paid for by a levy on everyone's bills. But obviously the beneficiaries of that, and it did turn out to be very, very beneficial for people who participated, were all people who owned their own homes by nature of the scheme, and were also people who had enough capital available to be able to invest in solar panels. So it so clearly from while it was very successful from an environmental point of view in increasing the amount of solar on the grid, from a social point of view, from a social and economic point of view, it was it could be argued that it was less successful in that it generally siphoned money from those who could least afford it to people who are sort of more comfortably off. So how do we ensure that doesn't happen with the next stage of government subsidies and investments to try and address this problem? So if we look at the UK energy mix, so you'll see this is the 100 years from 2021, and basically we've got lots. It's mainly just a big black block, isn't it? Basically, for most of the time, and that's coal, which is the thing that has powered the majority of Britain's electricity generation through that period. So we see, while we tend to think of like renewables as being a very recent thing, if you walk in the hills around Greater Manchester, you find lots of old hydro schemes and indeed some new hydro schemes around the reservoirs. So you see those coming in sort of the 1920s and 30s there. Along the top, then you've got nuclear coming in the 60s. That peaked towards the end of the 1990s, and is likely to continue to decline despite investments in things like Hinkley Point C. There are many of the UK's current nuclear power stations are scheduled for closure. So at the moment, nuclear is on the decline. In the 1990s, you see this big purple swathe coming in, and that was what was called the Dash for Gas, which was an attempt to replace more heavily polluting coal with cleaner, although still carbon heavy gas-fired power stations. And really, the great hope here is this. So it's worth saying on gas that the UK currently sources about 40% of its electricity from gas, which is about double the European average. So it does make us more vulnerable to energy shocks in terms of the recent gas price increases that we've seen. So the great hope here really is in renewable generation, which is increasing very dramatically currently, and we hope this long continues and continues to accelerate. But as I say, as we move more and more to rely on these elements, we need to be clever about it opens up a whole range of new challenges really about how we ensure consistency of supply. So in terms of industrial energy sector jobs, so this is just in, so this is not any service sector staff. This is not electricians or, even people involved in, working for energy suppliers. This is energy, just people involved in the industrial energy production sector. And you'll see that there was a very huge drop from the early 1980s onwards, and that was a result of the closure of UK coal mining, where about 250,000 people lost their jobs in that industry. And from that sort of from a low point in 2005, we've seen a steady sort of ramping up of new jobs within that sector, and that is currently increasing. So when we move out and look at how that looks nationally, you'll see that the Northwest is one of the highest employers in this sector, and that increasingly people are employed in low carbon electricity and bioenergy. So that's very much the direction of travel currently. So in terms of Greater Manchester, how does Greater Manchester fit into all this? So we have Greater Manchester has made a pledge to become net zero by 2038. So that's 12 years sooner than the national target. And this is important because because Greater Manchester is setting itself out to be a low carbon leader. But that's quite a challenging task to meet, and it means that that there is a huge mobilization in the region around upskilling the workforce to be able to meet this challenge. And we've seen projects with all the different Manchester universities working together to try and really up their game in terms of this issue. So in terms of job creation, we're looking at 400,000 roles by 2050. Now, 2,600 of these are roles that don't currently exist. So they're entirely new roles. So this is what we talk about when we talk about the potential for the green economy. So if you're thinking about a career and planning a new career in green energy, then there are lots of potential steps you can take. There's loads of really good free courses. Actually, I would really recommend people have a little look at this edX website. They've got lots of courses, some sort of taster sessions, some longer courses, mainly free, done by very highly respected colleges and universities around the world. And it's just a really good way of sort of dipping your toe into what does this actually mean? What is demand response about? How do you manage a fleet of renewable energy assets, and to give you a better idea before you commit any too much sort of time or money investment. There's also lots of apprenticeship opportunities available. So Electricity Northwest, our local district network operator that I mentioned earlier, now they have they've won awards for their apprenticeship programs, and I think they have a really progressive approach, not only in terms of diversity in their recruitment, but also in terms of looking internally for when they're trying to fill more senior management positions. So it's a really good place to be in terms of career advancement, really. So there are hundreds of other apprenticeships available across the energy sector. Obviously, do your own research before you commit your time, because we do know that apprenticeships in the UK are variable. So it's worth ensuring that you're going with a good one. There's loads of specialist college courses. There's degrees. There's postgraduate education in a whole range of areas around renewable energy, planning, engineering, and management. It's worth saying that the very few people who work for Carbon Corp or for many of the other organisations that we're involved in have such degrees or postgraduate education. They're people who've taken who've transferred from other career paths, really, or other educational paths. So there is you don't need these to get into this sector. Although if you do have those, then I'm sure you'll have no problem finding employment in those areas. So in terms of adapting existing skills, just to give you an example, so we have quite a lot of issue at the moment finding installers for rooftop solar panels, and this is because the energy crisis has meant that there's a huge demand for installing solar generation on domestic roofs, but there's also a big demand for it on commercial roofs as well. So it's and I think installers in the main are generally preferring commercial schemes because they're generally larger, the margins are generally better. So for homeowners at the moment, it can be very difficult to get solar panels installed. So if you're an electrician, if you've worked on site and have all your competent person qualifications, designations, then to do an additional course in solar installation is a 2-day course. There's another 2-day course in electric vehicle charging, for example. So these are things which are additional sort of strings to your bow, if you will, which can prepare you for the changing energy landscape. Or if you're or just contact your local solar installers and chat to them about what potential options might be available. And this is we're not just talking with these things about people on roofs. We're talking about all of the back office staff, all of the people manning the phones, booking the appointments, managing the workload. So there's lots of different roles out there. So I think in terms of roles, the main area of growth is going to be around this digitalization of the energy system. So, and we're quite fortunate in Manchester. Greater Manchester got several tens of millions of pounds worth of funding from the European Social Fund to provide for this Skills for Growth programme. And that program is coming to an end, I think next year, actually in 2023. So it's worth taking advantage of this while it's available. And what this fund means is fully funded courses for Manchester residents. And these are, some of these are really excellent courses which you would normally be paying, quite a tidy sum for, to better prepare the workforce for a more sort of digitized future. And these are everything from sort of short introductory online workshops to intensive 12-week boot camps. So, and covering a range of skills from learning code to managing digital leadership and all of these kind of elements. So so there really is a lot available. Most of the ones mentioned here are running sort of rolling programs for recruiting new learners. So it's worth having a look through all of these and see what the best options are for you and what takes your fancy. So to take the first one there, Coders Guild, you've got a whole range, I think, 30, 40 different courses in a range of different skills around this area. So, really worth investigating. And at the bottom there, we've got a guide that Manchester Digital did around all the different sort of coding schools and boot camps and reviews of what to expect and the different meetups and that kind of thing. And it's perhaps worth saying that within Carbon Co-op, we run a free meetup called Eco Home Lab every month, which we'd be very interested in seeing anyone there who wants to chat more about these challenges. So I think I will leave it there. Hope you found that useful. And I look forward to seeing you in person on the when we do the question and answer sessions. So please do bring your questions there and I will endeavour to bring the answers. So thanks very much for your time. Goodbye.